today's webinar, we're going to discuss the pending impact that changes to existing codes will present to the AV industry. Also, a brief discussion on the historical nature of the code development over the years. We'll also look at not only the code changes, but the changing requirements of product necessary to satisfy these changes. Not only must we have the appropriate equipment, we must also know what defines a good emergency communication PA. TOA has been and continues to be a manufacturer of equipment for ECS in Asia, Europe, and now North America. Some of the products currently available from TOA will be reviewed. The AV industry is well suited to be part of the solutions for these coming changes, and we need to make sure that these AV skills are ready to support M&S and ECS. M&S is not something new based on fancy technology. Centuries of climatic and geological pressures to communities required the ability to warn of possible pending disasters. As an example, marker stones were placed on hillsides to warn not to build below the marker because of past tsunamis. Not very high tech, but influential in communicating the need to avoid future calamity. It is these meteorological and geological pressures that have made M&S and ECS paramount in Asian and European societies. Now with these and geopolitical pressures and social unrest in North America, how we deal with these events are now starting to be addressed. Up until recently, building codes dictated the safety requirements required in North America, with further refinement to cover fire events via the NFPA 72, which is the National Fire Prevention Association coding. Typically, warnings involved audible alarms and visual strobes. When voice command was required, the same fire signaling speakers were used. However, they do not lend themselves very well to speech intelligibility. All coding compliances to this day are handled by the AHJ. That's the authority having jurisdiction, but more on this later. Now keep in mind that these codes are recommendations and are not law. The AHJ will decide, based on risk assessment, the needs for implementing these codes. The world is changing, and the need to respond to these changes are also changing. Significant changes to NFPA 72 are required because of geopolitical pressures in North America and overseas. Lives were lost because the notification systems were not sufficient and failed due to the evolving events. Because of this, efforts were made to look at how the systems were installed and how they were used, and how to make them more likely to survive in the event of a major mishap. After close scrutiny of the codes and how they needed to be changed, changes were made to the NFPA 72 in 2002. Most significantly, changes were made in 2007 to include the words M&S, but only as an annex. Included into an annex, the codes now indicate the desire to have a broader reach of communication and is used as desirable guidelines only. It was not until NFPA 72 in 2010 that significant changes were made to identify that not only should alarms be associated with fire, but that other events must also be identified. Different information or signaling should indicate the nature of the alarm, be it fire, a gas leak, or a tornado, etc. Also of note, a wide area approach to this communication is now being discussed to include multiple redundant communication methods to a large geospatial region with M&S as Chapter 24. M&S defined events as local, regional, or national in nature. Although speech intelligibility is introduced in Annex D, it is of great importance to the AV integrator as this now reveals that PA systems will be part of the notification solution. With this inclusion, public address systems can now be used to override fire alarm signals when the situation is appropriate. With the new wording in the code, many more design considerations will be required of the AHJ based on the risk assessment of the facility. Consideration will be given to how to evacuate the facility and how the communications is to be used to perform such egress. Multiple methods of alerting may be achieved, whether orally or visually, and are classed in two ways. One-way communication will alert occupants in or around a facility and no confirmation is required. The M&S system will now be integrated into the base building infrastructure, with the ability to control facility subsystems, and control will be centralized for monitoring. ECS can be used in harmony with common alerting methods already established, including the use of wide-area, high-power speakers for outdoor communication. Of note will be the inclusion of targeted messaging to widely dispersed interest groups via texting and video, as an example. Two-way communication will allow emergency personnel and building occupants to communicate for more efficient staging of events as they happen. The AHJ, Authority Having Jurisdiction mentioned before, is an authoritative group charged with decision-making on the level of code compliance required for a facility or region under their jurisdiction. The AHJ will oversee products, materials that are selected to enforce the required codes, along with how the system is installed and used. This would also include maintenance issues and documentation. When public safety is concerned, the AHJ may include government authorities, such as regional fire chief, the fire marshal, the building officials, and electrical inspectors, just to name a few. As you can see, the AHJ is not just one person, but a collection of concerned parties. Typically because the standards are not law, but guidelines for AHJs to make risk assessment decisions, previous codes are often used that may predate existing codes by a few revisions. The current codes for Canada, which allow for NFPA 72/2010, are being revised to reflect our current building codes and requirements in Canada. The intent is to have a harmonized coding system for the U.S. and Canada. Ideally, equipment designed for North America will have both UL and CSA ratings. What we can look forward to when the codes are changed in Canada? Certainly a communication system as visioned will detail many complex issues and requirements. Distributed and recipient messaging involving phone texting, computer screen pop-ups will provide contiguous, wide-area alerting. Varying levels of equipment compliancy, depending on the communication handshaking, will be implemented. Not all manufacturers' equipment is required to be completely compliant, but will be graded on the levels obtained. Backup systems of critical components and system ability to survive an event will be addressed. Different events will have appropriate alerts depending on the nature of the event. Public address systems that are used for ECS will now be required to have minimum performance standards, such as intelligibility as measured using handheld STI devices. Equipment supplying the audio chain will require tighter performance specifications for distortion, long-term use, and be able to provide even coverage. Still to be determined is when these systems will be implemented in construction. Are they retrofit, substantially new construction, or all new construction? Ultimately, it will depend on the AHJ's assessment of risk to a facility under their jurisdiction. Communication protocols will take the form dictated by CAP, which is the Common Alerting Protocol. The delivery method required to convey the CAP protocol is not the main concern of this coding, but that the message is delivered and at times acknowledged. So what is required to make sure EC systems meet as many of these requirements in today's world? Selection of equipment that has fire and M&S codes applied, of course. Provide even coverage for all areas deemed necessary for emergency messaging. This should be spec-driven and will require a plus or minus deviation from the consultants or spec writer. A good understanding of the ambient noise in the facility during normal operation and what can be anticipated when there is an emergency. The system must overcome the ambient by as much as 15 dB, depending on the nature of the area. Knowing the coverage area will help determine the type of speaker to be used, whether it's ceiling, wall, and the type of dispersion required of the speaker. Line arrays may be required in some reverberant spaces to help overcome the effects of reverberation. For outdoor use, when trying to cover large areas such as a campus field, it may require a special purpose speaker horn array system that will provide usable coverage over long distances. Amplifiers may require a method to determine if the speaker load is viable and ready to receive an alert message. For clear and concise messaging, digital message repeaters would allow for an emotionless broadcast during stressful events. These messages are often phased or staged and can be elevated at the discretion of the emergency responder. Systems will require fault detection and logging capabilities, thus providing system assurance and integrity. Off-site delivery of monitoring would be a desirable feature, thus employing existing data networks or special purpose infrastructure. Automated systems will be able to detect a component failure and allow for substitution of the failed component. One item most commonly protected in this manner is power audio amplifiers. To keep the system running, if the base building power infrastructure fails, will require battery backup or dedicated UPS sources. TOA, as a leader in ECS, has been providing equipment to the Asian, European, and markets of other regions. Because these regions have been faced with meteorological and geological influences, the challenge has been met to provide emergency communication systems. Only recently, with weather, political, and social factors escalating in North America, has the need to provide similar equipment to this market. With this increased market potential, TOA Corporation is striving to bring to market products that meet today's requirements as well as future needs. A good example of a product that meets many of the aforementioned features is the VM3000 system. This is a well-accepted product in the European marketplace and is certified to EN54 standards for emergency communication. Recently, the VM3000 has been introduced into Canada as a facility solution for critical paging. With expandable paging zones with BGM sources of up to 60 zones, the VM3000 can provide critical communication from small to medium-sized facilities. Features include amplifier redundancy, speaker line supervision, failure detection, external integration via an I/O bridge, and staged or phased digital messaging. To assure system integrity, data logging is retrievable off-site for evaluation. Easily programmed using a network computer, full system configuration is possible remotely. Combined with the emergency zone microphone, RM300MF, and general use zone microphone, RM200M, most needs for multi-zone paging are achieved. For wider area integration, VM3000 systems can be linked together using a network audio appliance, NX100. The NX100 will allow two-way multi-broadcast audio along with control I/O and even RS-232C for data exchange purposes such as pixel board data streaming and equipment monitoring. By using the NX100 at the near and far end, multiple VM3000 systems may be integrated for a wider area emergency paging purpose. For local or two-way communication, the N8000 IP-based intercom will allow for LAN and WAN-based communication using client or standalone TCP/IP networks. Door access and CCTV control allow for security-related functions, while door and master stations provide two-way voice-to-voice communication. With hardware QoS monitoring, this serverless system is well suited for integration into any critical security application requiring immediate voice communication. Combined with the VM3000, a complete wide area and local communication package can be realized. Delivering a critical message outdoors provides many challenges. Weather conditions, structural requirements, and the area to be covered are challenges for such a system. The TOA SC61 horn array system is purpose-built to provide clear critical messaging over a very large area. Depending on conditions, it is possible to achieve over 70 dB 10 kilometers away. Such systems require solid foundations and elevated well above the audience plane. The SC61 basic configuration comprises 4 horns and can be expanded upward to 8. The principle behind such a high-power horn is the ability to deal with horn throat pressures that approach 140 dB. By special design and alignment considerations, distortion at these sound pressure levels are reduced to provide a clear, coherent wavefront. Ceiling speakers can be selected to provide even coverage, such as the F122CU wide dispersion speaker. The dispersion and clarity characteristics of the speaker allow for reduced numbers of speakers in any installation. For general all-purpose signaling and M&S use, the cost-effective PC580 series with approved back can, HYBC580U, will provide suitable coverage to existing standards. Paging and signaling into warehouse and immediate outdoor perimeters, recreation facilities, etc., the CS series paging horn is well suited. The typical horn flare speaker combined with a cone speaker element provides controlled coverage with musically pleasing capabilities. Digital messaging can be supplied using the S20S, the EV20R, and the EV350R digital messaging devices. The S20S provides a modular solution for many of TOA's modular amplifiers. A half-rack solution is provided by the EV20R. Each is capable of storing several client tones or messages and can be activated via contact closure. The EV350 series is a sentence-based messaging system capable of assembling messages previously stored. Single words or phrases can be strung together to provide one complete sentence depending on the requirements. Now that we have looked at the present and future coding, influencing factors, and equipment required to provide today's necessary solution, it will be up to the integrators to make it all work. Traditionally, the fire alarm integrators have handled installation and recommendations for fire safety apparatus. However, as we go forward, as we have discussed, more traditional public address systems will be used. The PA systems have traditionally been installed by the audio and visual professional who understands the requirements for speech intelligible systems. It is this attribute that would lend itself to increased involvement with M&S. The AV contractor is already dealing with high-powered performance PA systems along with general paging. They deal with distribution of video and audio signals on a daily basis. Integration often requires programming and use of control systems to make a seamless coordination of all subsystems. RS-232 and TCP/IP protocols are fully understood and used regularly. The AV integrator will install these systems to broadcast standards, adhering to good wiring practices. And to implement all of these subsystems, good project management skills are routinely used to make sure the system is installed correctly, on budget, and on time. Documentation and drafting skills are regular features of the AV technician. Our relationships have already been established with end users, consultants, and spec writers, and electrical trades will allow for open dialogue to secure the project. All of the disciplines AV specialists perform on a daily basis will help provide the necessary talent needed to install M&S and ECS now and in the future. And finally, the relationship between the alarm and the AV personnel will be necessary. The opportunities are definitely there. And in closing, we have seen the evolution of ECS and M&S from simple to complex. Are you ready for the future? I would like to give credit in part to some of the material presented to our good friends at Infocom. Please obtain the Infocom white paper, NFPA 72-2010, and its implications for the AV industry. You can contact me if you would like to get a copy. I can send you a link or provide the actual hard copy in PDF form. Also, please research M&S using the web. It's a great wealth of information there, and certainly do not hesitate to contact me for any further information. And thanks, everybody, for attending this webinar.